Hi, my name's Ella Lentz. I am a sheep leader in Hants County, and I was previously a 4-H member for 14 years. And I spent a good chunk of those years doing the sheep project and raising market lambs. So I'm here to do a presentation on raising a market lamb. So the first thing that we should talk about when we're talking about raising a market lamb is determining the end product that you're hoping to achieve, and setting some goals for yourself. So the end product that you're hoping to achieve can vary. It might be a live lamb, it might be cut and wrapped meat, it might be a lamb you're going to sell by the side, by the quarter, and that really depends on what your market is and what the demand is. In regards to 4-H, in a typical year, the end goal would be to sell your 4-H market lamb for live weight at the market show and sale. But of course, sometimes we need to be a little bit more creative because things like COVID-19 happen, and we have to look for different avenues to market our animals. So sometimes that will change the end product that you're hoping to achieve. And sometimes you have other goals that you're hoping to achieve aside from the 4-H market project as well. So keeping in mind what that end product is a good way to start setting goals for yourself and determine how you're going to begin with the process of raising your market animal. Another thing that you need to be conscious of when you're setting goals are the regulations governing meat processing and sale, and the difference between provincial and federally inspected abattoirs and who's allowed to sell meat, and farm gate sales. But that's something we don't quite have time for. There is a little bit of information about that in the sheep manual that's provided by the Department of Agriculture, and I have a link to that at the end of this presentation. And there would be further information on probably the Department of Environment page about that. So first and foremost, what is a desirable market weight? That's a really important question when we're talking about setting goals, because of course animals have a specific growth rate that we're going to have to take into consideration when we're growing our animals. So in the 4-H show and sale, the desired end market weight is between 80 and 120 pounds. Members would only be paid for a maximum of 120 pounds. So growing your lamb larger than this desired weight won't earn you any more money in the show and sale. In reality, if you're feeding your animal to be grown above this 120 pounds, essentially, you're putting time and money into this animal that you're not going to be compensated for. So in terms of a return on investment for your animal, so the amount of money you're going to make versus the amount of money you've spent, you don't really ideally want to grow a lamb above this 120 pounds if your end goal is to put it in the 4-H market show and sale. And this 80 to 120 pound range is determined by the typical weight that an abattoir would look for in a market lamb to produce the cuts of meat that consumers desire. But of course, this is actually quite a large range in comparison to what some abattoirs are looking for. So if you're marketing outside of the 4-H show and sale, you should really connect with your local abattoir and find out what size of lambs they prefer to process for the consumers that they have coming into their place or whoever they're then selling these cuts of meat to, because that will really determine what they're looking for, and you want to be able to provide them with that product. So when we talk about achieving these goals, we want to consider things such as breeding and selection of your animal, and promoting good growth as stepping stones to achieving a desired market weight for a market lamb. In breeding and selection, choosing when to breed is important to producing an animal that will be an appropriate market weight by a certain time. And there's a number of factors that we take into consideration when we talk about choosing when to breed. So we need to consider the gestation period of the animal, which for sheep is approximately 5 months. We also need to consider the growth rate. And if we're purchasing an animal, knowing the age and approximate growth rate will help you make an appropriate choice if you have a predetermined marketing date, such as the show and sale, because of course that's always going to be sort of last weekend in September, beginning of October in a typical year. And that's a really important concept, because if we are showing at the show and sale, we have a certain range we want to be within. So with that gestation period in mind and a typical growth rate, I've always been taught that a typical growth rate would be a pound a day, but that's going to vary based on your breed selection and the environment that you're growing your animal in. So, a hard and fast 1 pound per day may not necessarily be what you're going to achieve with the animals that you have. Or maybe you're at the point where you're just choosing a breed and selecting parent stock. So you can actually make that choice to influence the rate of growth. So you can choose what we would call a terminal sire breed that would be a meat breed, and typical characteristics for them are good carcass qualities and good growth rates. And also in your choice of parent stock, choosing a maternal breed of ewe for your lambs, if you're doing sort of a crossbred operation, will also help with the growth of your lamb, because of course that lamb needs to nurse from the ewe while it's growing up until its weaning age at approximately 50 to 60 days. So breed selection and choice of parent stock also influences the rate of growth and the carcass characteristics. So you should make sure that you do your research about either the breed you're choosing your lamb from, or the breed that you're hoping to the breeds you're hoping to combine if you're actually doing that breeding yourself and not going out and purchasing an animal or selecting from a larger group. So those informed breeding decisions will help you to be successful. When choosing a lamb, because of course, sometimes we've bred a number of different ewes and we have a couple of different lambs to pick from, or if we're going out and purchasing a lamb, we want to look at the overall conditioning of the animal. Some key cuts of meat that the judge will be looking for when they're judging your market lamb, if you make it to the show and sale in a regular year, would be length of loin and the leg of lamb, because of course those are quite expensive cuts of meat. The other thing you want to look at is the rate of growth, so the age of the animal versus its weight. Going into a group of animals and just picking the largest may not be your best bet, because potentially that animal could be quite a bit older, and its rate of growth isn't appropriate for the marketing date that you're hoping to have. The other thing you need to take into consideration is if you're looking at a ram lamb versus a wether or a castrated male versus a ewe lamb, because typically this will impact their growth rate. Generally, castrated male animals reach they're finished. So they reach their desired market weight with the correct ratios of muscle to fat sooner than a female animal would. And a female animal will typically have a little bit more fat in their finished carcass than a male would, as a general rule of thumb. And that could vary with sheep by breed, of course, and environment and feeding. So when we talk about promoting good growth, the first thing we want to consider is the environment that we're growing our sheep in. So an environment that promotes good growth should be clean, because of course a clean environment promotes good health by reducing the risk of disease and bacteria growth and things like that. The other thing would be low stress. So making sure that the environment is free of predators, and other sorts of environmental stress, or things like overcrowding of the sheep can cause stress as well. And also the way we handle our sheep. So our handling facilities can also cause stress in the sheep. So having a low stress handling facility can also promote better growth in our animals, because of course a happy animal is going to eat and grow better than one who's really stressed. The other thing is we want to have an environment that's free from disease, and we can help this by monitoring our animals closely for signs of disease, so that you can treat them faster and prevent further spread and reduce the impact that this can have on growth. And of course, you just overall, you want to be monitoring for health all the time anyway, not just because it promotes good growth, but because it's good animal welfare practices. And finally, food and water should be fresh, easily accessible, and at appropriate heights for the animals in the pen. So, your feed and water can't be too high for your lambs if they're just creep feeding. If they're small, we also want them to be high enough that the animals aren't soiling their water or their food all the time. We want to make sure that their food and water stays nice and clean, and that the water is regularly changed out and fresh. Because of course, as we continue on, we get into feeding. Water is the most important nutrient to any animal, and sheep will drink between 1/2 to 4 gallons of water per day. And the general rule of thumb is that they're going to consume about 2 to 3 times their dry matter intake. So what they take in terms of dry matter in their food. The amount of water that they drink also increases with increased protein and salt consumption in their diet. So we want to make sure that we're providing adequate water, because of course, if water is related to their dry matter intake, we want to make sure that they're getting as much dry matter in as possible so that they're getting all of that energy to turn into body mass. The other thing we want to consider is that sheep are ruminants. So they have quite a complex digestive system, and ruminant nutrition is quite a complex topic that we won't really be able to get into right now. But essentially, the digestive system of a sheep has a 4-chamber stomach, and each of those stomachs functions differently to break down different materials that the sheep will consume. And the fact that they're ruminants allows them to actually break down things that a monogastric animal wouldn't be able to digest. So some of that plant material, because the rumen and other parts of the digestive system contain microbes that actually do some of that digestion for the animal. So of course, because they're ruminants, sheep will eat a fairly high, a diet high in forage, and forages would be considered to be like hay, silage, pasture, that kind of, I don't want to say stemmy, but that vegetation, the vegetative material that they're going to intake. And then we also have concentrate feeds. So sometimes you'll supplement their diets with grain, as well as mineral supplements to make sure that they're getting adequate nutrition and all of the vitamins and minerals that they need. And grain can be included in the diet to increase the energy. But because sheep are ruminants, they actually require quite a bit of dry matter and forage in their diet to remain healthy and for their digestive systems to function properly. So that's why we don't feed sheep a diet that would solely contain grain, because their digestive systems can't handle that. So we need to make sure we have a proper balance of concentrate and forage in a sheep diet. Okay, so just some final notes to end off about the 4-H Market Lamb project, things that, don't necessarily are quite different from the regular sheep project that we should all be aware of. All 4-H lambs must have the appropriate Canadian Sheep Identification Program tags, and that applies to all sheep anywhere. If they leave their farm of origin, they must have these tags. So if you're new to lambs and you're trying your hand at producing your own market lamb, make sure that you connect with the appropriate people to get your CSIP tags for your lambs. The other thing is all 4-H market lambs must be slick shorn for the show and sale. So that means that they need to have all of their wool shorn right off as short as possible, so that we can actually see what the lamb looks like underneath, which is quite different from the experience you might have in just the sheep project, where you're clipping your lamb and you're leaving some wool on them and clipping them to help them look their best for show. For market lambs, we're going to shear that all off so we can really get down and see what that animal looks like. The other thing is that all ram lambs must be properly castrated for use in the 4-H show and sale. And if you don't know how to castrate, you can ask your leader for assistance with this. And there's some information available online, and the farm animal codes of practice has information on how this can be done humanely and properly. So only wethers are accepted. No intact rams are allowed in the show and sale. Typically in 4-H show and sale, only the top 15 lambs are auctioned off. And so, you get to the show and you actually have to place well in the class if you want to be auctioned off. It's not just everybody who shows up gets to market their animal in the show and sale. So having some of these, backup ideas for marketing your animal is beneficial, even if your end goal is to make it to the show and sale, because you may not necessarily get the placings that you need to make it through to the auction. And there's a lot more to a market project than producing one single ideal animal. You in a longer term goal would be to develop a flock that doesn't have one animal you're going to pick out every year as the best. You want to have a really uniform flock of animals and be consistently producing good quality market animals, if that's your goal, is to produce market animals. And there's a lot more information than what I was able to present. So again, I've included the Think Farm sheep manual from NSDA. The link's here. It's also available on the 4-H website if you go to the sheep page under projects. And there's quite a bit more information in there. There's also lots of resources out there for anybody who's just getting into sheep farming or is looking to go purchase an animal. There's a couple of groups available that can help you out with that at a provincial level.